Be sure to check out our YouTube channel for episodes complete with every video we discuss on the podcast. Like and subscribe to youtube.com/@MinuteTheMovies to make sure that you don't miss a thing. Coming up on this episode of the Minute the Movies podcast, we explore the themes of Tron Legacy. In focusing on the father-son relationship in this movie, we can identify so many missed opportunities. Like Flynn, it's easy to mess up in a pursuit of order, control, and even perfection. But no matter how many times we fall, it's never too late to reconcile. Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Minute the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me is another Paul. We do this time every time you come on the podcast is you get the Paul Squared edition. And so, hey man, how you doing today?
I'm great, Paul. The only thing that's better than two Pauls is three Pauls.
We got to figure out how to get a third one on the podcast to a group.
That'd be awesome. I have two very good friends named Paul, and we had a get together at the house a couple weeks ago, and the three of us happened to be sitting on the same sofa, and somebody came up and says, "What is this, the Paul couch?" Well, yeah, it is. So get out. You're not invited, Rick.
Yeah, Rick, get out of here. For Paul's only. We're talking about Tron Legacy today. You just watched this movie last night again. And we're gonna talk about. I'm gonna just come out. I'm not even gonna build up to it. We're gonna be talking about missed opportunities, because in both of our notes, the very first thing we wrote down or typed was missed opportunities. So when we talk about Tron Legacy, and the setup is, coming off of Tron is you digitize a human. So Flynn now has this software giant company. And he goes in and the scene opens, and I want to kick off with the clip because I think it's pertinent even now to set up our conversation about missed opportunities. And honestly, it's great because it sums up the earlier movie. And so you've got the obviously de-aged Flynn. You've got his son Sam sitting in the bed who appears to be 10, 12-ish. And there's an interaction there, and you see him, it looks like he's putting Sam to bed, but Flynn's actually leaving, going back to the grid, going back to work. And we'll talk about that of what sort of his vision and dream is. But to start off with this idea of missed opportunities, so just sort of hold that thought in your mind as we listen to the opening clip and conversation of the movie.
And the world was more beautiful than I ever dreamed, and also more dangerous than I ever imagined. Hop in bed now, kid. Come on. Now, I met a brave warrior.
Tron.
Bum, 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 Tron.
He fights for the users.
He sure does. Oh, man, he showed me things that no one had ever imagined. There are these disc battles fought in spectacular arenas and cycles that raced on ribbons of light. So radical. And together,
You built the grid.
we built a new grid for programs and users. Now, I couldn't be in there all the time, so I created a program in my own image that could think like you and me. And I called him Clue.
Codified likeness utility.
That's right. And Clue, Tron, and I, we built a system where all information was free and open. It's beautiful. And then, one day, something happened. Something extraordinary. A miracle.
What was it?
That'll have to wait till next time. I gotta get to work.
I want to go with you, Dad.
Yeah, well, one day you will. I promise.
To the grid?
Good night, Sam. Hey, what do you say? Tomorrow, you and I hit the arcade. You can have a crack at the old man's high score. First game's on me.
Can we play doubles? On the same team?
We're always on the same team.
Now I'm going to label that as not a missed opportunity. That line, we're always on the same team. Great line. Really, it stood out to both of us. So Paul, what is it when you watch this clip, what is it that really stands out to you as it sort of sets up where this movie's going to go?
I mean, so much to unpack there. I mean, Flynn being a creator, a radical in his own way, and even from the first Tron, he was the original Tron movie. He was an outsider, right? He was kind of a proto. Forgive the rhyme, but he was a proto tech bro in the 80s, right? And a guy, who would come in and disrupt things like for real and have something to offer, not just break something just to break it. Somebody who puts, disruptor on their LinkedIn profile. I mean, that immediately makes me not want to talk to them. But somebody who's actually got something to offer instead of the status quo, that was Flynn. And so he's now telling that epic story to his son and inviting his son into the bigger adventure. Mm-hmm. Right. And he's saying, Sam's saying, one day I want to go with you. And Flynn says, you will, I promise. And that, really sets up the story of he and Sam. And then he talks about Clue, and it was a program I made in my own image. That phrase was not accidental. That was deliberate.
Yeah.
And, Clue obviously becomes we see him quickly. That's the Satan character in the movie, the corrupted, once beautiful thing. And, even then, even as Flynn is driving off and Sam is going to sleep, you can tell that they have a close relationship, and you come to find out later in the story, his mom had passed away and it was just the two of them and his grandparents. But that closeness of father and son and that desire for the son to follow in the father's footsteps, that becomes a recurring theme throughout the whole movie as well.
Yeah. Because I think if there's sort of and it may be, I may have misspoke, as happens from time to time, because probably the father-son dynamic is the primary theme, but missed opportunities is sort of the secondary underlying sort of swamp that's laying underneath. In this scenario, what you see is Flynn describing this utopia, right? It was beautiful. It was more beautiful and more dangerous, which is actually a really good message for dads to pass on to their sons, is that there's,
yes,
this idea that there is a bigger story. We're living in it. And then you see it and he leaves and, his son has to go to bed. He can't go to work. It would be dangerous for him to the grid. He's not ready for it. Again, this scene technically was not a missed opportunity, right? It was
no,
him
this
fathering
scene was,
him well.
was
yeah.
beautiful. It was a beautiful opening scene for this movie, and it really sets up what Flynn desired, right, was to have that relationship with his son and have his son with him. And so here's the ideal. And then things start to unravel and fall apart from there.
Right. Because, that night, Flynn gets taken out by he gets taken out by Clue. Because, as you said, Clue was set up in the image of his creator. And he didn't even necessarily go bad as much as he attempted to fulfill his program and his mission objective to the best way he could. What was he was to create the perfect program. And so, as we'll find out in this, they talk about these ISOs that come out, and that was the big miracle, is these programs had been spontaneously generated. I mean, I think that's a lot of what's happening with AI nowadays, is things are happening that the programmers can't understand. They're like, I don't know how it's learning. It just is, and it's amazing. And so you have these ISOs that come up, but for Clue, that's an anomaly. That's an imperfection that must be weeded out. And when we look at that, as we're talking about fathers and sons, and we see what is it that in that role, like you said, Flynn had a desire to bring his son into the story, to bring him into the mystery and the adventure of, his calling, but the bigger story of life. And we're not going to over spiritualize everything, because that would be a little forced with this movie. It's there, but it's not. I think you can see some things. Flynn was a terrible creator and is not a good analogy to God, so we're not going to do that.
Sure, right.
But that idea, this movie sets out this desire, both that we have in our hearts, both as fathers to father well our children, but also as sons to be fathered by someone who will welcome us into their adventure and their story. What I have is as a kid, it's oh man, I want to go do that with my dad. And, some of it, you hear about guys out in the West, and, if you're on a farm, you get to go out doing that. Or not a lot of guys are I want to go into the office and write computer programs, especially for non-game computer programs. How to build a better spreadsheet. Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
I guess the idea of it speaks to our desire as sons to be drawn into a bigger adventure by our fathers, who we trust, who we love, who we know.
Absolutely. And, I think at core, that's probably every man's, or very close to his core, a core desire, of his, is to have either his biological, his birth father, or some father / sage type figure. We were talking earlier about the way of the sage, and, how older men have so much to offer, but yet so many are like the man that you mentioned, stuck in such a small story of, where you went to eat for breakfast and what the baseball score was that day.
Yeah.
But at every stage, I don't think you have to wait till you're 70 to be able to offer that, as a man to a younger man growing up. But I think it's absolutely one of our core desires to be called up into something bigger than yourself. I mean, you look at, since this is the Men at the Movies podcast, look at Star Wars, right? Look at Braveheart with Argyle calling up William, right? Look at Morpheus calling up Neo in the Matrix. Those are just three off the top of my head. There's so many more, right? That my words are failing me now too. But yeah, that's the desire for sure. And then it gets corrupted along the way, and sometimes, dads get taken out. Yeah. Sometimes through no fault of their own. Sometimes it's very much their own fault. And they either don't know how to be a dad because they've not worked through their own stuff with their own dad, or for whatever reason, addiction, work, distraction, whatever. That's what John Eldridge would call the wound, and every man has a wound he's walking around with, and unfortunately, our earthly fathers can't fix it because they're wounded too.
Right. We're both fathers of adulting children. They're well on their way to being adults, and we look back at our own time, and I don't think we've been trapped in a computer software program along the way. But there's times that we have missed opportunities with our kids. When you look back over the life of your kids, what are some areas, and I'll even expand it a little bit, not just what are some areas where you feel like you missed opportunities with your kids, but where are times that when you look at your dad, there may have been opportunities missed?
Oh, well, if we're talking about me and my dad, this is going to be a long conversation. And a lot of that is healed and some of it still isn't. My father and I were estranged for a long time. We are just now starting the very beginnings of the process of trying to find some kind of common ground, and it is very difficult. And so, that's a longer conversation for another time. But with my kids, I mean, there's so many, and I remember specifically one time I own a small cabinet shop here in Ohio, and we, I work out of my garage. And when my son Joel was younger, we had a basketball hoop out front, and he loved to shoot baskets. And I would be working, with my table saw and kind of equipment that is dangerous if not used properly.
Right.
And Joel would be shooting baskets in the front, and I would have to have the garage door closed so that his errant shots wouldn't hit me when my hand might be close to a saw blade. Perfectly 100%, legitimate reason. But at the same time, I could hear the ball bouncing outside in the driveway and thinking I would cut my own hand off if I could go out there and play ball with him, but I have to work. I have to work right now because I'm on a deadline. And I feel like that's a missed opportunity. Earlier in my career, before I started my cabinet shop, I was on the road selling, and, we're a blended family. And so we have the kids, half the time. And so sometimes travel schedules would be such that I wouldn't see them for a week at a time.
Yeah.
And, I feel like I missed a lot of their lives just, working. And I think every dad probably feels that to some degree.
Yeah.
And thank God there's a lot of grace for that, because, now all three of they're my stepkids, but all three of them we have very good relationships with. And, like we talked about, before, our time when we were all together in Montana was just absolutely precious and was really fun to be all together. And so, many, many, many more missed opportunities. I mean, so many other specific stories I could tell, but there have been quite a few.
Yeah.
And I'm so grateful now that they're older that we've come back on the other side of that, and we still have not just healthy but very good relationships. I have very good relationships with all three of my kids that I'm eternally grateful for.
Well, and I appreciate you sharing that little bit about your dad, because it certainly puts this movie in a certain light for why it connects so deeply with your heart. But yeah, like you said, being part of a blended family for me, going through a divorce, there was nothing I could do that would mean I was a good dad, because best case, I was only there half the time. That's not even the missed opportunity. The missed opportunity is because of that pressure that I put on myself to then be perfect in every interaction.
Yeah.
I missed a lot of the interactions we did have, times that my kids were laughing and smiling and having a good time. I was constantly on guard of, do they hate me? Do they think this sucks? Am I winning? Am I doing a good job? Like, that pressure killed the opportunity that I did have, because I was seeing, like, it was sort of the trickle down, more of an avalanche than a trickle down. Where I had to, it was a day I was going through some old pictures and looking at all the stuff that I'd done with my son. I was getting ready for his 13th birthday, doing a kind of a celebration of the boy moving into the preparation to be a man stage of his life. And I'm looking and I'm like, look, seeing all these pictures and all the times that, in order to take a picture, you had to be there. And it's like Jim Gaffigan's thing is like, we bitch and complain about our kids all the time, but that's because we're hanging out with them. Like, we complain about going to a T-ball game because we're going to a T-ball game. You don't complain about it if you're not going. To sort of shift this because of what we focus on. And I'm going to go to this next clip, and it's after Sam has gone into the grid and he's met up with Flynn and they've had this reunion. And I love the line because Flynn's sitting there at the dinner table and he says, Sam, I guess it's time I should ask you for questions. And Sam's like, I just have one. And I think as a son and as a father to our sons, they just have one question. Why weren't you there? But this concept of what is it that keeps us from the opportunities, from the kids, I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier with the pressure of the deadline of work, but I think Flynn goes into it a little more here.
Tron was created by Alan for the old system. I brought him here to protect this one. Clue was my creation, a program designed to create a perfect world. Oh, we were jamming, man, building utopia. Hours in here were just minutes back home. This one I thought it couldn't get any more profound. Something unexpected happened.
The miracle.
A miracle. You remember. ISOs, isomorphic algorithms, a whole new life form.
You created them?
No. They manifested like a flame. They weren't really from anywhere. The conditions were right and they came into being. For centuries, we've dreamed of gods, spirits, aliens, an intelligence beyond our own. You seeing this? I found them in here, like flowers in a wasteland. Profoundly naive, unimaginably wise. They were spectacular. Everything I'd hoped to find in the system. Control, order, perfection, none of it meant a thing. I've been living in a hall of mirrors. The ISOs shattered it. The possibilities of their root code, their digital DNA, disease, history, science, philosophy, every idea man has ever had about the universe up for grabs. Biodigital jazz, man. The ISOs, they were gonna be my gift to the world.
So what happened?
Clue happened. Stop worrying about it, Tron. Man, everything's just fine. Everything's under control. Flynn! Am I still to create the perfect system? Yeah.
I don't know about you. There was two moments that really clicked for me. One is when he brings up the ISOs and he's talking about the miracle, and obviously Sam remembers. And you hear Flynn's voice get a little emotional. He's like, "Oh, you remember." And I think there's a gap again that I discovered when I looked at the pictures. There's a gap in what I think they'll remember and what they actually remember. I remember a buddy of mine several years ago was worried about his boys if something happened to them, and he said, "Did I teach them about how to treat women? Did I teach them about how dating and girls and all this stuff?" And I said, "Yeah, you taught them every day because it's how you treat your wife, how you engage with her, and how you do all that stuff." What is it they say? Stuff is more caught than taught.
Yeah.
Unless it's a fish, and then it's all teaching. There's rarely catching.
Yeah. Right. That's exactly right. You know, as we're sitting there, and I was listening to that, I was looking through some old pictures on my phone here, and from when my kids were little, and thinking, like, wondering kind of the same thing. Like, I have there's one I'm like where we first got our dog, and we took him for a walk in the park, and everybody's so excited. I wonder what they remember about that, because I remember, just trying to keep control of the dog so he didn't run away,
Right.
But their memory is very different. But I'm sure that, if you go back and ask them about something, their memories would probably be really different about events or whatever. And, to your point, it's gratifying when you hear your kids say something that you've said to them a million times, or that they somehow, it's obvious that they've internalized something that you've been trying to teach them over the years. And doesn't that feel good as a dad?
It depends on when they choose to use it.
There's that too. Sure.
I was playing golf with one of my sons and my dad and brother, and we were playing. I think we were just playing like a 4-man scramble, just out there having fun, taking the best shot. And so my brother had a drive. It was in the middle of the fairway, but like 40 yards short of the green. It was a really short hole. My drive had gone a little bit left. It was about 20 yards from the green, but it was up on a hill in the rough. And so the team selected to take my brother's shot, because they're like, it's in the middle of the fairway. It's a good distance. And I'm arguing. I was like, this is so much closer. I think this would be an easier shot and all this. And my son says, Dad, frequently you tell us that in order to say yes to something, you have to say no to something else. And we're saying no to your ball.
Shut up, you little brat.
I was like, all right, I'll pick it up. Whatever. Yeah, we ended up not chunking a chip. All 4 of us chunked a chip. I think we ended up, that close to the green, we parred it. But then the whole idea of the ISOs is, we've discussed, is sort of, that's the MacGuffin of the story of this magical being or whatever. But what he said was, he had a pursuit of control, order, and perfection. And so as a dad, as fathers, we frequently treasure, strive for, desire passionately to have control, order, and perfection in our house.
That's the world I hope to live in one day.
Well, you were saying your story this morning. Now the kids didn't take the trash out.
Yeah, I mean, come on, guys, seriously. But again, it is. I mean, and that's probably another missed opportunity, even just in my own, parenting too, of wanting to coach them and understanding that the time is short, but responding to it poorly. Like you were talking about, like even with, a vacation, you're putting so much pressure to rest that it's going to be stressful, not restful. And, I remember, multiple times of feeling like I want to coach my boys, or I want to coach my daughter in this way. And it'd be so, like, I was so tight about it because I knew there was some important things that I could teach them. And I know that time is short. I know that I only have them for a few years, and even half time at that. And so, when they just want to, sit around and play cards or something, and that's what they need in that moment, is just to have our presence, not our instruction.
Yeah.
And I missed a ton of that when they were younger. And it took me a long time to realize that, and to kind of back off the instruction and just be dad with them and let the moments come. I'm still not even close to perfect on that, but I found that if that's my attitude, the moments do tend to actually come a little bit more often than when I try to manufacture them.
Yeah. With a little more receptivity, because you're not trying to force it in. The whole idea that I want to separate the two things out. You've got control and order on one side. And, so much, and I actually think moms have to deal with this a lot more. This idea, like my kid has to wear something like this to school, or the other moms will think I'm not doing a good job as a mom. I think the mom shame is a real thing that's, I can't help, not a mom, so I can't help that very much other than just encouraging, my daughter, and she moms her son, my grandson. But how often what my response as father is to my kids is because I am concerned about how others will see them and think of me. We've got to show up on time for the soccer game, or they've got to be acting this way. Really, it's their actions more than anything. You can't be showboating after a goal because otherwise they'll think that I'm not teaching you humility or something. Like, so much of their behavior, my concern for their behavior is based on my concern for how they're reflecting on me. And actually, I remember my youngest, when he was 14, we were at a cabin in Maine with my parents. It was me and my two of my boys, and then my parents. And my youngest is a supremely picky eater, and he's also blessed with the stubbornness of a mule. So if he doesn't want to eat something, he's not going to eat it, which I'm hoping will lead to a resilience to peer pressure. But so, like, I'm stressing out. I'm wishing he would eat this, and this is a dish that was made by somebody who's not even there. Like, they had given my parents a casserole and they weren't there. And my mom was, in my mind, I'm like, wait, you're treating him like a 4-year-old, not a 14-year-old. And I got aggravated. I had to go check on something. I had to go get something from the boat because I had to get out of there. And as I'm walking, I'm like, why is this bothering me so much? And one thing was like, well, we're treating him like a 4-year-old, not a 14-year-old. But then it's like, well, why am I doing that? Well, it's because I don't want people to think that I didn't teach him manners.
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, that's not on me. It's like, I taught him manners. He's just choosing not to do them or use them or display them. Also, I'm worried. I always think it's funny. Like, when we go to somebody's house, and to be a good guest, you're supposed to eat whatever's put in front of you. It's like, if I was hosting somebody and made something that would make the other person sick, I'd like to know about it. I'd like to know that they don't like that. But as the guest, they're like, oh, we can't say anything to offend the host. We don't. Like, for me, it was eating sardines in Spain because I choked one down, and my wife was like, oh, I'm full. And I'm like, oh, you left me hanging there. I was all by myself. You backed out, and I was forced to eat the sardine on a cracker. But again,
sardines aren't that bad. Actually, I like sardines. What's wrong with sardines?
They're oily,
all
and
right,
eating them, and like, what, you couldn't eat them because the cracker was huge, so it was like biting them in half and stuff, and it was unpleasant. We did get off the trails there, but this. Like, how much this idea of control and order doesn't really come from a heart for our kids. Because, like, if I'm worried about him showboating after a goal, well, you know what? The world's going to show him how to behave. You showboat in a baseball game after you hit a home run, you're going to get chin music on the next pitch. The coach can handle it. The other kids on his team can handle it. The other kids on the other team might handle it. He can learn on his own. Not every lesson has to be from me. But again, because so much of the motivation is from my desire, how am I perceived as a dad by the actions of my children?
That's a great point. Doesn't that take the pressure off too? Is it not every lesson he's going to learn has to come from me? I think you hit it right on the head there. Especially with boys that are involved in some kind of athletics is a great example of that. Joel, my son playing football right now, he is going to figure out what the culture is like, and he will choose to either be a part of that culture and contribute to it, or he'll rebel against it and he'll be ejected from that culture. He's chosen the former and chosen wisely because it's actually a really good culture. But yeah, I didn't have to teach him that, I mean, when he was in 5th grade, going out for football for the first time, I played football and I'm, coaching him up a little bit and saying, okay, here's what to expect, and out of kindness to him and saying, wanting him to feel comfortable. Here's what you can expect. The coach is going to yell. You're going to be physically uncomfortable. You're going to get hit. You're probably going to get bruised, all these things. Okay, that's fine when he was in 5th grade, like your son when he was 4.
Right.
But when he's 14, or when my son's a senior now, it's, hey, are you ready for practice? Yes. Got everything you need? Yes. Okay, great. We'll see you after practice. And that's the extent of it, because he knows, because he's grown up, but he's figured out, how to behave within that culture. And I didn't have to teach him that, which is
sort of
pretty cool.
Giving them honor of autonomy. I'm not going through a checklist every time you go to practice. Do you have your girdle? Do you have your pads? Do you have this? Do you have that? Because if he gets there and doesn't have it, he'll learn. Like if my kids, it's cold, they don't want to take a jacket. Okay, I don't care. You'll be cold. Just don't complain. Or it's hot. You want to take a jacket? Okay, but I'm not carrying it. Like I let my kids make their choices a lot. Like I have my youngest, when he was like, again, that 4 or 5, he had this yellow kind of polo golf shirt and then this brown plaid tie from the 60s that he loved to wear to church. And was I going to tell him how it looked? Nope. And everybody thought they thought he was just cool looking as we walked into church. Nobody said anything negative about him, but I'm like, you know what? There's one of 2 things that'll happen. Either he'll discover that he likes it and will go with it and won't care what anybody thinks, or somebody will say something and he's like, oh, maybe I'll change my clothes, and like he'd learn from it. He would grow from it. But if I was the one always judging his clothes and he's worried about pleasing me, then it's like, no, you wear what you want. You want to wear a red shirt with red shorts? I don't care. 2 different colored socks? Okay.
Our daughter was like that for years. Yeah. And I 100% agree with you, Paul, because they're learning to make their own choices. And if all they're doing is looking to us to make their choices for them, then they're going to be 30 years old, asking us for, what should I eat for dinner tonight?
Right. Right. Yeah. You want to give them as
we
much.
We did the same thing, raise our kids to be independent. Yeah.
Then I go over to the other side, right? Because we've got control and order on one side and the chase of perfection on the other. And there's a quote, because perfection is tough to weed out of our search for perfection in ourselves and in the world around us. It's hard. But there's a quote from Zay Frank that Morgan talks about. It says, perfectionism might look good in his shiny shoes, but he's a little bit of an asshole, and no one invites him to their dinner parties or their pool parties. Like we want, and really to me, I'm more internalizing it to be the perfect father. But then I think about if I am putting so much pressure, and what I've discovered is the more pressure I put on my heart, the more pressure I put on the hearts of the people around me. And conversely, the more grace I give my heart, the more grace I'm willing to give the people around me. And so I want to take that idea, move to the last big clip, because, there has to be a final battle, right? So Clue and Flynn have to have a face-off about what happened. And we see that along the way, Flynn has grown. He's come to understand what happened, and he owns that he's not been perfect. He owns that things have changed. And what he does, I think, is a model for all of us as fathers, for even children that we sort of, again, because Clue is sort of his child. He's created in his image. And it's a very important approach for us to take to our children.
And Paul, if I could interject one more thing before you start the clip, what we learned previously about Clue is before this final battle, Cora, the character, had told us that you can't just erase Clue because Clue was a part of Flynn, and they will both die in this universe. So you can't just kill Clue without killing Flynn. And so that makes the stakes of this battle that much more important.
The cycles haven't been kind, have they? No, you don't look so bad. I did everything. Everything you ever asked. I know you did. I executed the plan. As you saw it. You promised that we would change the world together. You broke your promise. I know. I understand that now. I took the system to its maximum potential. I created the perfect system. The thing about perfection is that it's unknowable. It's impossible, but it's also right in front of us all the time. You wouldn't know that because I didn't when I created you. I'm sorry, Clue. I'm sorry.
That's really a sad moment, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's almost, like the son saying to the father, literally, I've done everything you've asked, and it's still not enough. Like, I still haven't earned your approval, is what you could interpret that. And that's sad. I mean, how, just thinking of times when, my own boys have come to me looking for approval, and I offered them criticism, or what I would say coaching, in place of just presence and delight. And well, that's a tough one, man. That's a tough one.
Yeah. And I wrote that. I even wrote that down as we were listening to the clip of I did everything you asked. And you hear the voice of torment that I think so many of us as sons can feel, of heartbreak towards our fathers, of I did everything you asked. I would do anything for you. Just, you said we would do this together. You said that this was your vision. We did everything you said, and it was, like you said, it wasn't enough. My grandson, his dad lives in a house about 2 hours away. He sees him a couple times a year, maybe. And Kaysen's at an age where phone calls don't work very well for him because he can't handle the emotions. As a almost 50-year-old man, I see that in him now. When I was going through that same thing with my kids, when they wouldn't come to the phone when I was in Iraq, I just experienced the hurt of longing to see my children, and they don't want to see me, is how I interpreted it. When in reality, they were like, no, they miss you. They don't know how to handle it. Seeing you actually makes it feel bigger. And so they take that and almost act like, I'm mad at you because you're not here. Because, they're kids. They're little. They don't know. And I loved what he said is, you don't know that. Flynn says this to Clue. You don't know that because I didn't know it when I created you. And that happens so many times. When I look back on the 20 plus years of being a dad. And I remember thinking a few years ago, I was like, I wish I could go back in time and be the dad that I am now 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Would rescue my kids from so much pain that I put them through, from not being so many of those missed opportunities because I was not as wholehearted. I was still immature. And the other message of this movie that I wrote down was that it's not too late.
Yes.
And we have to remember that it's not too late.
No, it's not. And, I've made reference, I think we were talking about Point Break, to my son who almost lost his heart, but he didn't completely. And, I'm thinking to multiple conversations now where he's in his early 20s and, Paul, I've gotten so many things wrong as a dad, so many things. But one thing I got right was I taught my oldest son that good whiskey is to be savored and enjoyed.
It's a valuable
and
lesson.
It's not to be right. And so we have bonded over good whiskey. And I think, it's a little bit of a stretch to say, hey, I'm going to buy this really nice bottle of scotch, and that's an investment in me and James. My wife's going to call bullshit on that immediately. But it's not too late. And the conversations that he and I have had on our back patio, or, sitting in some bar somewhere, just sitting at the bar, having one drink, enjoying each other's company, we've had some very profound conversations, and it's not too late. And for anybody who is thinking that it's too late, man, as long as you draw a breath and as long as they draw a breath, it's not too late. It's really, really not.
Yeah.
And I believe that. I've said that my whole life. I didn't used to believe it, but I believe it now. Like, I really believe it. And thank God for that.
Yeah.
And in Joel, in the book of Joel, who my son is named after, and that's a whole other story. It says, God will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. And that's either a promise or it's a lie. And I'm going to choose to believe that it's a promise. And even in what sometimes is really hard to believe, sometimes it's really hard to believe, but I believe it. I really do. And I've seen it more times than I could probably even remember anymore.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right, Paul. And that's the second thing that I think both of us wrote down on our notes was it's not too late. And so Flynn or Sam, he gets his dad back. Flynn gets his son back, and even for a short time, they are together in the adventure and in the battle that they wanted to engage in, even back when Sam was 7 or 8 or 10 or whatever it was at the beginning of the movie. And it's a short time, but they get that. And he says at one point, the ISOs were the gift that I wanted to give to the world. And at the end of the movie, you see the last remaining ISO, Quora, in the real world was Sam. And so Flynn, in a manner of speaking, he completed his mission.
Yeah.
And Sam was a part of that, and he couldn't have done it without Sam.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And what I noticed was it ended with, I'm sorry. Because as a dad, there are so many moments that we should apologize to our kids. Yeah. And yes, maybe what they did was wrong, but the way we reacted was also wrong. And
yes,
so many times when my daughter was in high school, I would call her ranting and raving because I was uncertain of the path I was supposed to go. If I do this, it feels like this. If I make this decision, it feels worse, and I'm stuck. And so I'd call and I'd rant and I'd complain and I'd yell. And about 5 minutes later, I'd call back and say, I'm sorry. I've never parented a 17-year-old daughter before. I am making it up as I go along. I'm doing the best I can, but I love you. And, my daughter and I were relatively estranged for, she got pregnant while she was still in high school. The baby came in December of that year. And for a long time, we saw each other infrequently. And one of the most important things that my therapist told me during that time when we were talking is, it's like, you can be right. But if this guy is a jerk, if this guy is treating her poorly, if she decides to break up with him, what in your relationship would make her want to come to you?
Ooh.
Yeah. My therapist, he says he's not a prostitute. He doesn't get paid to make me feel good.
Wow. That puckered my sphincter a little bit, that question did. Whew.
But, as the kids get older, we do move from that control and order to allow them the dignity of their choices. And when they make those choices, like you were saying, it might be sitting over a glass of whiskey and he says, Dad, I got this problem. But that relationship is developed. It's funny you said that. My dad told us that he smokes cigars because that's the only time we ever talked around him, was when we were smoking cigars together. And so, what in our relationship makes us open and available to our kids in a way that will make it, when they screw up, 'cause they will, what will make them come to us? And it starts with how we treat ourselves. Give yourself the grace when you screw up. Say, you know what? I'm still learning. I'm a work in progress. As you mentioned, I have to sort of forgive myself for the pressure I'm putting on. My wife and I are taking a restful weekend away, and I was putting so much pressure on it being the perfect weekend of rest and relaxation. So we would come back to this busy time, recharged and restored and all those words. And I was having a panic attack today because I'm feeling like I'm missing something. I'm not doing it good enough. I got to do it right. I got to do it perfect, because that's what that strive for perfection does, is it actually kills what you're trying to accomplish. If you want to be the perfect dad, you're going to kill it. If you want to have the perfect kids, you're going to kill that relationship. And just have that, I'm sorry, ready. Adam Carolla used to say he always walked around with an FU in the chamber, ready to fire off immediately. I think we got to have an I'm sorry in the chamber, especially to our wife and our kids. To say, hey, I didn't react the way I wanted to, or I'm that's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. And trust that they'll receive it.
If the person you're in relationship with has any kind of affection or desire to be in relationship with you, if they're at all remotely mature, that will be received really well. And that was made clear to me even on Tuesday night. And a friend and an ally and a guy who was critical to the mission that I'm on came over, and he and I there was some tension with us for longer than it should have been. And we sat down on the back patio, and he said, I got to apologize to you, man. And he listed out the reasons why. And my immediate reaction towards him was forgiveness, compassion, and then the desire to reciprocate and say, you know what, man, I'm sorry too, because I played a big role in this tension over the last couple of months, and I'm sorry too, and let's talk about it. And we talked it out, and it's all good. But that's the overcoming that fear of being willing to say I'm sorry to your kid because you're not sure how they're going to react. Now, their kids, sometimes they'll throw it back in your face and I'm sorry. But usually once emotions settle down, you get that. I'm thinking of another specific time where my daughter, who is she is very strong. She is extremely strong and very verbal. And so, you talk about your son being a picky eater and stubborn as a mule. That's a kind of a volatile combination. So is a strong personality and acuity with words. That can be rough. And she and I got into it one day, and then, I had to go somewhere legitimately to the, the grocery or whatever. And I came back, and as I pulled up in the driveway, she was waiting for me on the front porch. And this is when she was, I don't know, 13 or 14. And I stopped the car. She opened the car door and like jumped in my lap, and she said, "I'm sorry."
Mm.
And I said, "Yeah, me too."
Mm.
And we just sat there and had a moment. And then, we went in and had dinner. And it was a beautiful moment. And just being willing to offer that to somebody, I think more often than not will have really, really good results for the relationship. At least that's been my experience.
As you mentioned, the words of Clue sounded an awful lot like the words of the older son in the story of the prodigal son.
Yeah.
And we've got, it's very easy to relate to the younger son, both in looking at how our children may have gone astray or gone wandering or gone in search of themselves in places that we wish they didn't go. But there's a moment that they reach out to us. There's a moment where they may not come fully to their senses and repent entirely, but there's a moment when they reach out. And how are we going to respond? Or in the words of Clue, why would you do all this?
You knew I'd beat you. And still you did all this for him? Why? He's my son.
When we don't know what to do, when you may have grown up with an absent father or an estranged or an abusive father, with a poor example of a father, we know that we have somebody who says that about us. And we look at Jesus and we can look at God and say, why did Jesus do all that? And he looks at us and says, because you're my son. And when we can actually receive that without trying to control, order, and perfectly be willing, perfectly be in approval, like earn the approval, if we can just accept his acceptance of us, then we can become the sons who can become the fathers.
Yes. And it has to start there, right? Because you can only take someone as far as you've gone yourself, right?
Right.
And that, accepting God's acceptance of me. I mean, that I learned that from Morgan, just like you did a couple of years ago, several years ago. And that's been, transformative in my life, and thank God for it. Because as the more that I reconcile my own stuff, because nobody bats 1,000, right? I mean, whether you mentioned abusive dads or absent dads, or even good dads who are deeply flawed or deeply wounded, or, fighting for their own lives and trying to do a good job and just don't know how. Mm. Thank God that we have, the presence of the Holy Spirit to be able to access the heart of the Father and access those resources that He wants to give us. Because without Him, I can't even imagine trying to do this. I mean,
right.
I have a good relationship with the Lord, Paul, and I screw it up all the time. I mean, I can't imagine trying to do it without Him. So.
When you're looking at the reason that this movie hits, and it is a very poignant, was I think the word you used at the end. There are these poignant moments in this movie that are created both of our longing to be sons who are fought for, and to be fathers who would sacrifice for their kids, who don't demand control, order, and perfection, but just welcome the presence of our sons and our fathers. So Paul, yes. Thank you for this time. Thank you for sharing more of your story here. It's always an enjoyable time sitting down and having these conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. I'm glad we got this one on the books.
So this has been Paul McDonald and Paul Nichols talking about Tron Legacy. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?